So what we're going to talk about today as it relates to capability-based architecture transformation is a little bit of a case study based on some work we did with a company that, found themselves in a situation that I think a lot of organizations find themselves into, which is they had, grown through acquisition over the past so many years. And of course, when you do an acquisition, you acquire everything about the target company, so not just the people and the customers, but also their products, their IT systems, their IT infrastructure. And so they found themselves in a situation where they had what they believed was a lot of unnecessary complexity and likely redundancy, because of course, each of these companies was, self-sufficient, in their in their initial stage. So, what they found, of course, is that they, every acquired company had, teams, people and processes and software applications to do a lot of the same sorts of things. But now that they're part of a larger organization, they wanted to try to see if they can get those acquired companies and the products and customer segments that they were targeted towards, converging on a common set of capabilities that could be exploited across the enterprise. And as is a trend that we've been seeing over the past number of years, they wanted to think about, the complexity and diversity of the software that ran their day-to-day enterprise into what are called platforms. And the idea is that these platforms were a way to try to represent, some of the shared common services that are, that they had envisioned to be used by their commercial products. And, those products were delivered via numerous channels, including, their website, mobile applications, and third-party partner APIs. And the executive management team, really needed a business-oriented way of looking at this so that they could understand kind of where are we at, where do we need to make some of our investments to consolidate some of these core services and deprecate and retire some of the ones that were acquired, and of course, track progress as they're getting closer to the future state target architecture. And so enterprise architecture was invited to help to try to contribute to this. And the biggest thing I think that we were able to do is to try to provide a standards-based approach using a capability-based view of their different platforms to support this transformation effort that was going across the entire organization, working with both the executive stakeholders and the different platform teams. And of course, try not as architects were somewhat, aspire to a fundamental principle of reuse. One could make a claim that's the idea that, architects are lazy, which of course isn't the case, but the idea is that, why should I spend time, creating something, brand new when I can perhaps exploit the experiences and investments of other organizations. So, basically tried to align our practices with some of those standards from particularly the Open Group and TOGAF, the architecture framework, Archimate, an international standard for architectural modeling, as well as best practices around capability modeling from the Business Architecture Guild, which, just FYI, the Business Architecture Guild produces a set of best practices called the BizBock Guide, a guide to the business architecture body of knowledge. And so, phase one was really trying to get, the different parts of the organization, converging on a core set of platforms. And the way that this was done is basically tasked each, well, first of all, they identified a set of platforms, and then just asked each platform team to come up with a hierarchical taxonomy of their capabilities in the sense of trying to represent what their platforms offered to external consumers. And, as often is the case, enterprise architecture wasn't invited to participate until, this effort was actually well underway. And so initially, many of the teams, or most of the teams had, put together, to the best of their knowledge and the best of their ability at the time, what they thought were effective capability taxonomies, without particular guidance from enterprise architecture. And it turns out that provided some challenges, which I'll talk about. But nonetheless, I think we were able to provide some good guidance to kind of right the ship and make sure that, again, the teams were embracing, some of these best practices, at least from an architecture perspective. And so, each of the acquired organizations, had a particular brand, and what they really wanted to understand, at least at a high level of the different acquired companies and products, was, as it relates to some of these core platforms, which of each brand of the acquired company are they using those core capabilities. And so they were basically, after they came up with their individual capability models, which again, they were built, again, independent of one another, which was another challenge that I'll talk about. They asked each team to do an assessment to say, well, as it relates to each platform's capabilities, is that something that you are using out of the core common services? Is this something that is being provided locally by the individual brand? Is it possibly being provided by a third party, namely not by the core common services or by the brand? And then there were, of course, the outliers of, in some cases, some of those capabilities weren't appropriate or applicable to a particular brand's products, or because of time and other priorities, wasn't actually assessed. Fortunately, the majority of the assessments came back with, the first three indicators predominantly populated, and is not often, surprising, as has been affirmed by Gartner research for many years. The world's most popular architectural modeling tool is Microsoft Office, and so they had started with that approach. So they had lots of spreadsheets. Some people actually used PowerPoint, but they did, the best they could at the time to try to capture all this data, at least to kind of get us a sense of where each brand was as it relates to, again, trying to converge on a core set of services. But to help, try to set the stage of what we're doing here, felt it would be useful to try to explain, some of this terminology. So it turns out that, again, this whole idea of identifying platforms, again, is not perhaps as novel today as it was when we started this. Particularly, again, one of the groups that we work with, the TM Forum, has released a specification called the Digital Platform Reference Architecture, DPRA. And when we think about, what is, the core element of that architectural reference, is the idea of a platform. So what is a platform? It's a logical grouping of capabilities, which of course we're going to talk about on the next slide, that are supported by people, software, and hardware that support business capabilities and processes. And so one of the things that we'll, talk a little bit about, again, is this is very much focused in the application layer. So if we think about the standard domains of enterprise architecture, business architecture, application architecture, data architecture, and technology architecture, which of course there's also commonly considered a fifth domain security architecture. That again, this was very application oriented. So really, again, kind of focusing on the software, but there is a higher level that I'll talk to a little bit at the business architecture and the business operating model, particularly capabilities and processes. But the idea being is that, these platforms are unique across the enterprise. So, fortunately, the acquiring company had done a pretty good job kind of already segregating, again, these core services into these logical groups. They had not initially, again, explicitly identified what the capabilities of those platforms were. And so they started with, again, tasking each of the platform teams with, again, identifying their capabilities, but with the principle being is that a platform, has a set of capabilities, and that those are supposed to be, and again, this is aspirational as it relates to the future state, should be exposed through a set of well-defined APIs. And of course, this is one of the technical challenges that the teams were facing, is that, there was quite a bit of legacy implementations out there that were using more old-fashioned, as it were, mechanisms for exposing these capabilities through APIs. But the future state architecture was focused on, modern ways of looking at this, particularly through REST APIs and GraphQL, for example. But the idea is that we needed to have a well-defined set of APIs that were going to eventually be mapped to those capabilities that are going to be used by various types of external consumers. And those would be, their, commercial products that were offered by the brands, other platforms, because sometimes there's need for one platform to use the capabilities of another platform, and third-party partners in their ecosystem. And the idea is that, this platform is owned by a team that implements and supports all of the platform's software applications, and is responsible for its day-to-day operations. So this kind of represents, again, certainly something that's been much more common lately, really trying to get it into DevOps mindset, namely, the people that build the software are the people that operate the software. And so it turns out that they had a whole product management team around each of these platforms. But one of the ideas, and this is trying to, support some of the best practices in architecture that I'm sure many have heard about before, is the idea of, encapsulation or information hiding, which was, the idea that the consumers of a specific platform's capabilities, should not need to understand anything about the internal implementation of those capabilities. So they're, pure, consumers, and, don't want to get sucked into the gory details about, what particular programming languages or data stores or inter-process communication and all the underlying technologies. They just want to use the services, and that, using the capabilities of one specific platform should not require knowledge or usage of other platforms. And that's, I think we could say that, you got to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. Namely, you do need to know what each of the different platforms have to offer so that you can pick the right platform. So, this is a part of trying to create an enterprise, portfolio and catalog of all of these different services. But the idea here is that, when I'm using a specific capability of a specific platform, I should not have to know about other platforms as it relates to, consuming that particular service. And of course, one of the premises is that we wanted to be able to have a future state a landscape where, new and improved products could be rapidly created and assembled by reusing the existing capabilities of one or many platforms. And if it were determined that a particular requirement was not being addressed, that people could look at the capability model of each of the platforms and identify where that new requirement should be implemented, whether that results in an improvement to an existing capability or possibly requires the creation of a brand new capability. But herein lies again one of the challenges that they were facing at the time, because kind of each platform team was acting independently, is having some governance and clear decision making about when a new requirement comes up, which platform should be the one to implement it. Because as I'm sure many people have noticed, that and experience is that one of the things we want to be careful about in software development is scope creep. And one of the ways that that could manifest itself in these types of circumstances is that if a particular platform team is asked to implement a new requirement, and particularly when there's funding associated with it, most people are not going to say no. That's we really shouldn't do that. That's not my problem. It really should be related to a different platform where that requirement would be better addressed. So again, an opportunity for enterprise architecture to provide a broader perspective across the entire ecosystem to make sure that when these new requirements got identified, that they were directed towards the appropriate platform team. And then we've got the idea of the capabilities themselves. And so this definition here is derived from the definition of a business capability from the Business Architecture Guild. But the important thing is to understand again is that since we're at the application level, we're talking about platform capabilities instead. So what are the logical representation of what these platforms do. And again, the idea that a capability represents the ability or capacity that a platform may possess to achieve a specific purpose or outcome. So some of you that might be familiar with the best practices around business architecture, this is pretty much the same definition, except the word business has been replaced by platform. But as I'll talk a little bit later, one of the future state opportunities is to connect these individual platform capabilities to a higher level business capability model for a number of reasons. So just like the platforms themselves, these platform capabilities need, or at least aspirationally, should be unique across the entire capability model across all of the platforms. One of the things that's important about that is making sure that capabilities are well named. I'll get into that a little bit actually in a couple of upcoming slides. But as many may know, the challenge with building these types of models is not so much, how do I do it in a particular tool or what notation do I use to use it? It's the words that are associated with, each of the different rectangles in the model. And there are some, again, best practices from the Open Group and the Business Architecture Guild that can really provide some great guidance on how to, properly name things so that we, can guarantee uniqueness. And so again, one of the things is that we wanted to be able to have some assurance that any particular capability that was identified for a particular platform was not just uniquely named within a specific, that particular platform, but that it was unique across all platforms. Because if people are going to go out to a registry of platform capabilities and search for, well, should I work with if I need this type of service, we don't want people to be confused when they see possibly multiple platforms claiming to offer the same capability. And of course the question there is, are they actually delivering the same capability, or are the capabilities just named in such a way that it causes some of that confusion? But ultimately, when we think about what these platform capabilities are, is they're trying to represent what a platform does. So they're, again, logical things, as opposed to the actual physical implementation. So these capabilities and the way that they're named should not represent why or how a platform does something. Those are usually accommodated by other perspectives, namely, a value stream might be a way to represent why we're doing something, or a business process might be a representation of how we're doing something. It should not reflect, where it's being done or who is doing it. So even though there is an affinity between a particular platform and a team of people that support that platform, we really don't want to get into some of those internal organizational structures more than we need to. And of course, we don't want to expose anything about how it's actually physically implemented using particular pieces of software or particular types of technology. That being said, a platform's capabilities will be implemented or realized, as we say in the architecture profession, by one or many software applications. We expect that these capability models are going to be hierarchical, so that the idea that there are going to be parent and child capabilities. The top level capability we typically call a level 1, or abbreviated as an L1 capability, where its child capabilities are designated as L2s, and the children of the level 2 capabilities are designated as L3, so on and so forth. And this, of course, was one of the challenges that we saw across the different platform teams, is they all kind of had their different approach for how to decompose their capability model and how far to do that decomposition. So we had some platforms that ended up, decomposing stuff sometimes down to level 4 and level 5, where other platforms felt that it was, sufficient to keep things usually at a level 3 would be the deepest that some people went. But because when the team started, this guidance that you're seeing in these slides, hadn't been put together and shared with them. They just did the best, job that they could. But of course, in enterprise architecture, we're trying to look at the entirety of the ecosystem, and we wanted to make sure that that the taxonomies of the different platforms, looked as if they were built using a common set of principles and guidelines. And of course, when we started, that was very much not the case. And as we worked with various platform teams, we made, I think, some decent progress. But of course, there's still great work to be done. But one of the guidelines for creating a capability model, again, whether it's a business capability model or in this case, a platform capability model, is that the top level capabilities, the L1 capabilities, are those things that should be responsible for managing all aspects of a particular business object, in the case of business capabilities, or a particular data object as it relates to application or platform capabilities. So for example, and FYI, all L1 capabilities are supposed to have a very simple naming convention, where we put the name of that business or data object and then follow it by the gerund management. So an account management capability, should represent all the things that an organization does related to the account business object or data object. And so just to give you an example of this a little bit more concretely, we're going to take a look at some capabilities around customer interactions and customer management. So this is a very simple Archimate logical data model. So that's what each one of these blue rectangles represents, is a chunk of logical data, which again, in a more mature practice that had things in place already for business architecture, this might be derived from a business object model or an information model. And the idea is that this really represents kind of the common vocabulary of the enterprise. At least this is a way to represent it. So this is a graphical representation of a data dictionary. And of course, it's a small slice because there would be many more of these models for all the different subject areas and domains across the enterprise. But as many people may know, where a lot of projects and teams get into trouble, it can often be traced back to language, namely the words that we use to describe our problem domain. So, for example, it turns out because the organization offers direct services to consumers, but also works with third parties, those are both considered to be customers. And so, we needed to make sure that we understood, what is a customer, how is it similar yet different from a consumer, and, made some investments in, again, identifying some of those terms and relating them to one another. Each one of these rectangles should have a clear definition behind them. I'm not showing those in this particular deck, but obviously we've got, the customer, concept is in the middle. And we've got kind of a couple of different branches here. So on the left-hand side, we had the idea that customers possess an intent, namely something's going on in the real world that's, causing them to possibly require an interaction. So intent leads to interaction. And then those, interactions, again, are usually initiated by the customer, but there are some circumstances where, particularly when we're getting into being able to predict what customers' intents are by monitoring, how they're using our software with some, analytics, AI and machine learning, that in some cases, those interactions actually might be initiated by the company itself. Like, hey, we're seeing that you're having trouble, executing this particular transaction. Would you like some help? So instead of waiting for the customer to initiate the interaction, sometimes they're triggered internally, or fallout processing, which is really common, where you see people start to create an order, for example, but then find out that they abandon it. And so they've, got the ability to reach out and say, hey, it looks like you didn't, complete your order. By the way, we've got a new special going on, or a special, discount code, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, those interactions eventually, lead to one or many conversations. And of course, those conversations in the modern world might be with, actual humans, specific customer service representatives. But they also might be with, IVR systems, websites, chat bots, mobile apps. There's a lot of different channels in which we kind of have these conversations. And then, through using our products, customers encounter issues. Some of those issues are undesirable from a customer's perspective, so that may result in a complaint. Some of those issues require remediation, so they result in the creation of a case to track and resolve those issues. Again, sometimes cases are triggered again internally, particularly if there are concerns related to fraud or regulatory compliance. And then there's a common need for customers to exchange documents. So, this is, again, just trying to lay out, what are some of the core concepts when we talk about doing, supporting customer service. And it is immeasurably helpful in putting together our capability model. Now, it turns out this was one of the special special ingredients that a lot of the platform teams did not understand. So when they put together their initial capability models, there really wasn't a clear, concrete definition of what a capability was. People were given a lot of flexibility to name and define their capabilities. But and as you'll see in a little bit, one of the side effects of that is, people ended up using different language, different words for the same thing and the same words for different things. And so it started to, cause confusion across the platform teams, and particularly from a consumer perspective. So with, some of this language having been defined, and this happens to be a particular platform team that architecture worked pretty closely with, we were able to then come up with a set of capabilities related to their platform. So this was, related to the customer service or customer success platform. This, just FYI, is also an Archimate diagram where the customer success platform is identified as a coarse-grained, logical application component. That's what the little symbol in the upper right-hand corner represents. And since these, again, when we think about this from a true business architecture perspective, these are not business capabilities. Some may know, there is a capability element within the Archimate language, but we recommend that it really be constrained to be used for business capabilities. The platform capabilities are being represented by what are known as Archimate application functions. And so that's what that little kind of rotated chevron icon in the upper right-hand corner of the boxes inside looks like. And so, you won't find, again, a one-to-one correspondence just because of, trying to keep things simple here. And again, you're not beholden to these principles and guidelines. So, for example, you'll notice that, 6 of these top-level capabilities can, I think, be directly traced back to the data model that we saw earlier. So the idea of case management, complaint management, conversation management, document management, intent management, and interaction management. Those can all directly come from the preceding diagram, where each of those was identified as a separate data object. And it just turns out that, there's a little bit more to that as it relates to the customer service reality, that we also have to be able to manage our agents. So that, should be another rectangle on that diagram. And we also have to, manage and provide information to our customers through various channels. And that comes through, again, content management. But herein lies, again, one of the the things where a business capability model, we made recommendations, would be hopefully very well received, although there might be some stakeholders that aren't quite sure what it is and how it's different from this, is that you might not be surprised, the customer service area is not the only part of the enterprise that has to deal with content management, for example, or case management for that matter. So while urging people to follow some of these conventions could lead to circumstances where we might be able to identify, hey, a couple of different platforms, they've all implemented their own content management solutions or their own case management solutions. If each of these application functions or platform capabilities were traced to a higher level business capability model, that would provide even greater insight, particularly to executives across the entire platform ecosystem, that, hey, there's really, no reason for us to have 3 or 4 different case management or content management solutions, or for that matter, document management solutions. So let's see if there's opportunities to do, consolidation, because what's the big difference between case management, content management, document management, and customer service, as it relates to, fraud and compliance, for example. And so these would be, again, the top level L1 capabilities for this particular platform. And then just to show you, in this case, I think we just went down mostly to L2. I think we went to L3 in a couple places. Here are the L2 platform capabilities for one of those top level capabilities, customer complaint management. And so again, one of the best practices, and some people, I think I understood some of their concerns, about some of this stuff getting a little wordy, but it is important that all of these, again, capabilities, stand by themselves. So one of the things that's, not surprising, with the exception of agent, for example, that all of these capabilities start with the word customer. And so we've got customer complaint management at the top. And then, we've got different aspects of the kinds of things that we do in regards to customer complaints. We do customer complaint analysis, customer complaint classification, customer complaint documentation, customer complaint identification, and customer complaint prediction. Where, again, each one of these is also supposed to be defined. There is a industry standard guidance from the Business Architecture Guild on how to define these capabilities. So, for example, the top level complaint management is defined as the ability to predict, identify, classify, analyze, store, and track a customer's dissatisfaction with regards to products or services in accordance to regulatory rules. But the idea is that, again, we want each one of these capabilities to have its own unique name across the entirety of the enterprise, so that, for example, that if someone was doing a search in a service portfolio, they really don't have to know, at least when they're looking for some functionality, which platform is implementing it. And when they identify it, they have some assurance that it's not, related to a different capability, that has the same sort of name. So, in order to help the organization take the next step, a part of it was, proposing that we provide a architecture platform for managing this content. So, having people, capture this data initially in office productivity tools like Excel and PowerPoint is not unusual or particularly novel, but it's really, really, really difficult, as many may know, to sustain and keep that content current. So the first thing that we had to do, because architecture tools are just like other pieces of software; they can only do what we ask them to do, is to make sure we have an agreement amongst all of the different players. The planning people, the platform people, the architecture teams, what's the language we're going to use to describe this ecosystem? And so in enterprise architecture, we call that common language to be what's called a meta model, i.e. a model that represents how we build models. And again, that was predominantly based on best practices from the Open Group Architecture Framework and Archimate, with a particular focus on application architecture. Then we took the Excel sourced data and loaded that using some ETL tools into the enterprise architecture modeling tool, which happened to be Sparx Enterprise Architect. We ended up having to do some manual transcriptions of the content that was in PowerPoint, put it into Excel, just because we had a very simple template and ETL process for doing that. But the modeling tool is really just the purvey of the architecture community, both enterprise architecture and platform architecture. And it's been my experience that, we do need to have a high fidelity, rigorous engineering tool to manage all of those different requirements. But, the number of consumers of that content that are not architects is certainly 1 or 2 orders of magnitude greater. So, for every architect, there's, 10, 50, or 100 people that are not architects and not modelers that need access to this information. And so we created dashboards in our enterprise architecture collaboration website, which happened to be provided by a product called Sparx Collaborate. And then again, it's one thing, as many people may know, because this is not a novel idea. This is something that many organizations have tried to do with various levels of success over the years, is, making sure we had some good ideas about how we were going to maintain this content informed decision making. So we came up with a governance model based on a set of governance processes and a RACI matrix that was going to allow us this to be integrated into both the product and the platform development lifecycle, which was really their solution development lifecycle. So the meta model that we came up with, and again, this is simplified. It was a little bit more complicated, but I think this kind of represents the essence of the kinds of things that we were trying to keep track of and how they were going to be related to one another. And the work that we did was predominantly focused more on the left-hand side, where the right-hand side represents kind of where phase two was going to go. So the whole idea is that we have platforms at the top. So first of all, platforms may use other platforms. So again, we do not want one platform to implement some functionality that's already being provided by another platform. So that would be high level, mapping between each individual platform. But ultimately, again, a platform provides a set of platform capabilities. And those platform capabilities are composed of other platform capabilities. So that represents, kind of the decomposition. And then from a logical perspective, one platform capability may use other platform capabilities within the same platform or across the ecosystem to other platforms. But then, the big focus was, again, trying to make sure we could have, again, a good inventory of all the platforms, capabilities, but then, map that to the products that are developed by each of the individual brands to get a sense of, each of these acquired companies and their products, which ones of them were using the capabilities of these core platforms versus having created a local one-off implementations, which of course, when they did that, they weren't one-off because they were a completely separate company. But now that they're a part of the larger organization, again, trying to converge on, again, a common set of those platform capabilities. And a big part of this was trying to understand, because it's one thing to come up with, all this content, do all this mapping, but then, what are you going to do about it is, of course, the real question. So we have projects in the upper left-hand corner, and projects would either, and this is based on their PMO and organization structure, is there were basically two types of projects. Projects that improved individual platforms, because what they found is that certain platforms and certain capabilities of certain platforms weren't quite ready for this more broader common usage across the ecosystem. So there needed to do some projects to improve particular platform capabilities, and then once those platform capabilities were basically ready for adoption, then we needed to make sure and track again the status of that readiness of adoption. We also could based on the current usage of those capabilities or non-usage by individual products, have other sets of projects that were driven by more of the brand organizations to switch their usage of perhaps internally implemented capabilities to their brand to the core platforms of the organization. So a big part of what really made this real, as opposed to what some might perceive as a academic architecture exercise, was all this content was used to inform decision making about how many projects they're needed to do, what their scopes and priorities of those projects are, and how to manage the complexity between evolving the maturity of the individual platforms themselves and all of the products from the different brands that used those platform capabilities. Just real briefly on the right, the whole idea, as you may recall, is that a best practice is that a platform's capabilities should be exposed through a set of APIs. Those APIs are, again, implemented by software applications that, again, can be thought of, implementing or realizing those platform capabilities. And then, of course, all of these applications, both within a particular platform and across platforms and into the different brands' products, were integrated with one another. So we had a high-level dashboard where platform teams, brand teams, planning teams, and executives could go in and see what was going on with each of the platform taxonomies and their status. And a high-level platform that allowed them to see, again, all of the platforms and the top-level L1 capabilities. And of course, these are all interactive dashboards, so you can click on things and drill down. But the whole idea being, again, is providing a modern user experience for people to interact with this content without necessarily having to understand all the gory details of some of the things that we've already talked about, or how this has been implemented in a particular modeling environment. And then if we take a look, had the ability for a particular platform here, customer service or customer success, the ability to dive in and see their top level L1 capabilities, and then see the corresponding L2 and then possibly L3 capabilities. So it's really trying to make this capability model as accessible as possible, because again, in past experiences, we certainly have done similar things like this before. But if the only people that can get to this information are people that have a high fidelity engineering tool that really cuts out a lot of the most important people that really need to understand this. So again, providing that kind of user experience we found was pretty critical to the success of this endeavor. And then the idea is being able to then, drill down into a particular platform and its capabilities and see, what was the state of usage of each of these capabilities offered by these core platforms by the different brands that they had acquired over time. So, this is really kind of an enhanced traceability matrix. So, this is just showing, again, a subset of capabilities in the compliance platform. And then, based on, again, the rating on the left, which of these are offered by third party. In this case, none of them are shown in purple. Which ones are offered by, the core corporate platform that you're using, which ones are offered by your brand, which ones haven't been mapped or are not needed. So you can see, like, brand 3 and brand 7, for whatever reason, because of the nature of their products, did not require using any of these particular L2 capabilities. But brand 2 had, because of work they'd already started before this, had already migrated their usage of those core capabilities. But there were a lot of other brands that still were, using local implementations of those capabilities, particular to each of their organizations and products. So, this, provided an opportunity for, these different brands to, put together plans, as well as to make sure that this particular platform was ready for those other brands to use those capabilities. And the fact that in this particular case, a particular brand had, already onboarded and were using all of them, provide a lot of good evidence about their readiness and preparedness to accommodate all the other brands. However, just because one particular brand was able to move their implementations locally to these core common services, does not necessarily mean that there might not be requirements that these other brands' products have that may require, again, enhancements to those capabilities. So again, a lot of complexity in the dependency analysis between these two groups, the brand product group and the platform development. But one of the things that we're able to do is able to provide some visibility into what's the nature of these platforms, at least as we do some analysis across the different platforms. And so one of the things that we were able to find has to do with the level in which each of the platforms decompose their capability models was pretty varied, as you can see here. So in this particular case, the compliance platform, we think actually went a little bit too far. They decomposed things, down to level 3. They had, 189 level 2 capabilities and 545 level 3 capabilities. And that really seemed kind of an outlier, at least as it relates to complexity from some of the other platforms. But that being said, it is not, we do not expect that a particular, that all subject areas, have to be, decomposed to the same number of L1s, L2s, or L3s, because it may be very possible that certain platforms have some inherent innate complexity that requires, more of that stuff. But it did cause us to go, this is very much an outlier, at least compared to the other platforms. So, it provided us an opportunity to do some further investigation and provide some recommendations. And then actually, based on name matches, and so this gets back to our initial discussion about, the importance for us to come up with unique capability names, is that we were able to identify a number of cases where the same capability was identified more than once, with either within the same platform or across multiple platforms. But since this was being done on a exact name match, it didn't necessarily betray what we thought was also occurring, which is that there were duplicate capabilities implemented across different platforms, but they weren't as obvious because they did not have the exact same names or even similar names. So to help, provide a platform for, addressing this, we put together a set of governance processes. And so this kind of represents, a big picture view of, on the left-hand side, the processes go all the way from the executive team doing strategic planning to the portfolio team doing portfolio planning, and then actually doing software development at the product and platform level, how enterprise architecture, might be able to provide some support. So just FYI, this is a BPMN diagram, the business process modeling notation. But one of the things that we found, particularly when we were sharing this with some executives, is that when they saw diagrams that had perfectly straight lines and perfect right-angled corners and stuff like that, it made some people feel that this was a little too engineering-like, even though it is very much, business process engineering. So we were able to turn a little switch on in the tool that turned this into what was called custom style mode with a hand-drawn visage, so it makes it look like more like a sketch. But just FYI, this actually is a first-class BPMN model in the modeling tool. But what we were trying to do, particularly since enterprise architecture was a new party to all this at the time, was to try to represent where we felt enterprise architecture could provide some support. And so the idea is that and it's not unusual that many organizations, depending on the play and how this unfolds, are kind of a bottoms-up approach. But as many may know, this bottoms-up approach does struggle with getting connections with the right types of decision makers to really make a material difference. And a lot of this depends on how the enterprise architecture and business architecture function within an organization. Where is it funded from? Who's in charge of it? All that sort of stuff. Again, in this case, we were kind of doing, that really traditional kind of bottoms up approach. But, based on experience, we know that, enterprise architecture can provide a lot of support for higher level processes, but a big part of the success of being able to do that is, building awareness with some of those stakeholders that enterprise architecture, has something to offer. So, for example, in strategic planning, enterprise architecture, particularly because of all this information that the enterprise architecture and business architecture community captures, has a great opportunity to provide guidance into the executive team when they're putting together their strategic plans, and doing that predominantly through what are called strategy maps from the Business Architecture Guild. We also can provide planning guidance to people that are putting together and identifying the initiatives when they're doing portfolio planning, to make sure that we're not, because one of the ways to cut off a project that might not do too well is to not actually fund it as a project in the beginning. So because enterprise architecture is often concerned with that holistic end-to-end enterprise view, and using some of this type of data that we've collected, provide some good information about where investment should be made, again, because there's a finite amount of those assets. We only have so much time, we only have so much people, and we only have so much money. So, where should you make your investments based on, which products and which platforms, need the most attention? Because one of the things that I often see from a portfolio project management perspective is a lot of organizations, particularly when they're, focusing on the IT landscape, are really doing a lot of redecoration of the same rooms in the house over and over again. So they're, putting in new carpet or a different type of flooring material. They're painting the walls, the same walls, different colors every year, rearranging the furniture. But, the room itself isn't fundamentally changing at the expense of other parts of the enterprise that, where there's holes in the ceiling and leaky pipes and dangerous, electrical wiring. So again, providing that visibility doesn't necessarily, by no means does this say that enterprise architecture is, telling executives and portfolio managers, what to do, but they're just advising them to say, hey, just want you to know, that room over there that we, everybody uses, it's really important. It's got a hole in the ceiling and there's rain coming through, the roof. It's up to you to decide where you want to make your investments. You certainly have that authority and perspective, but just want to make sure you understand that while we, repaint the walls again in, this particular room, there's other parts of the enterprise that really need some help. And that's often done through putting together what are called value stream maps to represent, where those types of critical investments might need to be made. Then when we're getting down into, the commercial products that we develop, we can also provide product development guidance, and often that's done through managing a business capability model, which was, again, one of our recommendations out of the work that we did here. We can also provide, more technical support through reviewing engineering design, help manage the maturity and improve the outcomes of individual platforms. And we can provide, development guidance to individual platforms, as well as providing abilities to manage the entirety of the ecosystem. And that's actually, where we've, put most of our effort in our initial initiative was in the lower right-hand corner. And so when it came to managing the ecosystem, we identified 10 different processes, 5 for managing platforms and 5 for managing the ecosystem. So we wanted to provide some guidance on, how do you build a platform capability model, because the whole idea of acquisitions, are going to continue to occur, and or the organization might look at the enterprise and say, well, it sure seems like we're getting a lot of requests to provide, functionality in this particular area. Maybe we need to create a brand new platform. So how would that happen? And then there's all the mappings that need to be put in place about how capabilities are mapped to brands and products and APIs and applications. How do we manage that? What happens when people need to change the platform taxonomy or update some of their properties? And then the ecosystem itself is, we wanted to make sure that, of course, we've got something in place to manage the overall governance process, review the outcomes of that governance process, because one of the things we want to be very thoughtful about is making sure that these processes don't become overly bureaucratic. And that people aren't just going through the motions because someone says we have to follow this process, that it's actually resulting in positive business outcomes. And then part of that gets into some of the the technical details of running an architecture practice, managing the overall meta model, and managing how the different systems integrate with one another to support all of this content. And in particular, this was really the thing that was the major concern, which was, once, we had all these platforms, all these capabilities put into place. Again, some teams we found very interested and willing to work with enterprise architecture to improve their taxonomies. Some other organizations weren't all that interested, but we knew for sure that, that we would still have to continue to maintain those capability models across the enterprise. And so we came up with a governance process for how those changes were going to be managed. And I'm not necessarily going to go through, every single box here, but just to try to point out that, usually this would start from someone on a particular platform would want to make a change to one of their platform capabilities, either change the name, change the description, maybe, withdraw it, rename it, decompose it, into more finer grained capabilities. So they were the ones that started the process. There was a platform advisory team that would look at all of those and determine what, the course of action was going to be, and then, share that back with the platform team. But there were certain circumstances where, the platform team, might object to the recommendation, which may, depending on the nature of the request, require some escalation. And so there was also a governing council of directors and VPs that could help, manage some of those conflicts that happen across the different platform boundaries, and then eventually, implement that change request and document it appropriately. And then we came up with a simple, based on those processes and the different organizations that were involved, a RACI matrix that identified, which roles in which teams were either responsible for, performing the activity, accountable for approving it, as well as people that were consulted because they had an important perspective, as well as people that we wanted to keep in the loop and informed. And one of the things that this did require was the ability to pull together, because enterprise architecture, got invited to the game a little bit later than other people had started. There are a lot of different pieces, moving pieces of this in the IT side of stuff. So we had Sparx Enterprise Architect as being the architecture repository. But there also was a portfolio management tool that the portfolio managers were using to manage programs and projects. There is a project management tool that the brands were using to keep track of all of their individual products. An API manager for keeping track of all the REST APIs, a deployment tool that represented all of the microservices that were deployed across the enterprise. And then how are we going to exchange information? And a decision was made, not sure if it was the right decision, and in hindsight, but it was the decision that was made at the time that there was a new analytics platform that was being put together, particularly for this convergence initiative, became kind of the clearinghouse for all of this information. So basically the architecture tool, would send information to portfolio analytics that would make itself downstream into the product and portfolio management tools. We would also pull in, again, API and application data from those applications. And again, we wanted to take, of course, a architectural approach to making sure we understood how this complex, web of IT applications were going to work together to share this information so that, the planners could do their part, the product managers could do their part, and the architects could do their part. So where this is going is to, continue to, if you think about the meta model that I showed a little bit earlier, we had, platforms and capabilities in the middle, and then products and brands on the left. That was really the focus of kind of phase one, doing a good inventory and accounting of where the improvements were needed, where the convergence was most important. But then to really take it the distance was to really complete the mappings on the right-hand side to APIs and applications. So, some of this work had been started by a couple of platforms, but didn't get very far. So there's a lot more work to, map all of those APIs. And of course, when we started looking at this, we found that there were some data quality and data completeness issues around the data that was in the API management tool, for example, as well as the deployment manager tool. But we also wanted to be able to extend this eventually to all applications. So not just platform applications, but all the pieces of software that, supported each of the individual products. To make sure that, again, we've got a full perspective. And one of the things that the CTO was particularly interested in was, well, just because we can write a piece of software that does a particular function, related to these platforms, doesn't mean we really should. So what they wanted to do is come up with a way of tagging each of these platform capabilities as whether they really represented something that was core to their business. So it was a strategic capability. Therefore, it really demanded making those risky investments in custom software development. Because in my opinion, particularly in 2023, we really want to reserve the usage of portfolio investment dollars for software development, just to those things that are so important and we think are so either differentiating or competitive that it's it's worthwhile taking those risks to do custom software development. But as you guys know, there's so much software out there that's world-class, best of breed, that does a lot of commodity common functionality that it really just doesn't make sense for us to continue to make those investments. So a part of that phase two was going to be having, the executives in the organization make some strategic determination about which of these capabilities do we really think we should be building custom software for, and which ones do we think we shouldn't be. And so therefore we should retire those custom software apps that are supporting those more commodity capabilities and make sure that, again, we're making our custom software developments and things that really make a difference. We also, particularly when we're going to get mappings to more of the implementation of the application architecture, particularly in APIs and the application portfolio, we'd be able to deliver a lot more comprehensive architectural insights, particularly as it relates to uniqueness and clarity of each of the APIs and unnecessary complexity as it relates to application integration. And a really big one was making sure that all platforms segregated their data that they were responsible for in a way that if another platform or a product wanted to get a particular platform's data, they had to go through some sort of data API, as opposed to directly accessing the data store, through a JDBC connection or something like that. So making sure that, these platforms were fully encapsulated, not just through the REST APIs for their regular functionality, but also at the data store level. As is not uncommon, at least as we've seen over the past number of years, a lot of people are looking at migrating quite a bit of their IT operations functionality to ServiceNow. And so this company had identified that as something important, but that actually just introduced, another rectangle on the application integration diagram. And we need to make decisions about, well, for example, does it really make sense to continue to make investments in a proprietary custom-built product management software application, or should we perhaps try to reuse some product management capabilities of ServiceNow instead? And since ServiceNow also has a capability of implementing a CMDB, a configuration management database, for all the deployed software and technology assets, maybe we should use that functionality instead of some of our custom API management and deployment management functionality. So while I think it is a really relevant decision, introduced again a lot of additional moving parts, which is going to be the focus of future work. And then, I think that there's been, enough experience with the operating model that we tried to influence to get to this point, that we really needed to elevate the value proposition out of purely the IT space and provide a way for non-IT people to interact and really have some good transparency and visibility about what's going on. So better alignment with business architecture and strategic planning. So that's all I've got, folks. Thanks for your time and attention. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me offline.
Chris, we thank you so much for presenting with us today. Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity, Susan.